Okay, so I'm very excited today to talk to Niki. She is going to tell us a little bit about what she does. She works with Indigo and she's an artist, and I'm excited for her to tell you herself. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience? What is your background, and how did you get your start in the dyeing and indigo world?
My name is Niki Tsukamoto, and I am an artist, and my practice centers around natural dyes and natural fibers. I was introduced to the ideas of natural dyeing, wasn't really called that so much, when I
Mm,
was a child by my great-grandmother. I spent a lot of time in her garden and working with plants. That was kind of the start of it for me. And then I originally was studying medicine in university, and I dropped out and started studying natural medicine, which is what I had kind of been practicing on my own through high school. I
mhm.
had a lot of health issues. I still have a lot of health issues. So there was a lot of kind of trial and error to figure out what was working. And my schooling led me to study Ayurveda, and I was introduced to Ayurveda while I was in school. And that is the arm of traditional Indian medicine that is
Mm,
focused on medicinal dyeing, and
mm,
it sort of rang a bell inside of me and reminded me of the practices that my great grandmother and my grandmother had, in the sense of creating compresses and poultice and these sort of things, where essentially it's the same sort of concept of applying herbal medicine to fabric and then applying it to the skin as a healing method.
mm,
And then about 20 years ago, I started studying indigo intensively in Japan. That
mm,
was my real introduction to indigo and indigo dyeing. I had fascination with indigo, but
mhm.
didn't have a lot of access to the dye itself, or even really a lot of knowledge of how to go about preparing a dye vat. I had some very old texts on how to create essentially urine vats, and that was
Mm,
kind of what I experimented with in the beginning, because there just wasn't a lot of available information. The internet wasn't really a thing,
mhm,
um, and I just kind of happened upon some people who were generous with their time and
mhm.
information, and helped lead me into my own indigo dyeing practice. So I guess it's been about 20 years now that I've been working with indigo, and I'm nearly 50, so I guess maybe 45 years that I've been playing with natural dyes. But
Wow.
as my, like, the sole focus of my practice, it's been about 20 years, but I think maybe mid 90s I really started studying natural dyes. I had access to Penland, which is a wonderful school in North Carolina. Natural dyes kind of became trendy in the mid 90s, and so there were kind of a plethora of classes, and the herbalists that I was lucky enough to apprentice with also, I just learned naturally some information from them. Yeah, I guess that's kind of
Yeah.
my personal history.
Yeah, you did your research by physically going straight to the source,
Yes.
which maybe, yeah, which is very cool. Probably provided for, a very rich knowledge base to start with. So that's lovely to hear. I'd really be interested to hear you share about uh, this very unique entry point into indigo, the medicinal properties and the history of dyeing. I feel like maybe your studies have led you to have a lot to say about these two subjects. So, I mean, I don't know how far you think uh, the medicinal properties go, but I'd love to hear what you found and kind of the history behind that.
Specifically to indigo, or just in medicinal dyeing in like overview?
I think overview, and then you could highlight some particulars about indigo that you find fun.
Okay. Well, I think the idea of medicinal dyeing in my practice specifically
Mhm.
is more the the actual healing properties of the plants
Mm.
and less geared towards creating color. Um,
Mhm.
Most of the medicinal dye plants that I work with kind of lend themselves to color fabric yellow, which is
Mm.
a tendency in the plant world. The majority of plants that create color, you're going to find lean towards yellow. So if your color is what you're looking for, um, then it is a bit limited. But a lot of plants have topical uses in the areas of being antimicrobial or antibacterial. So even when you're looking at indigo, those are some of the main properties. And this has been common knowledge for a very long time. And you'll see in history, even people using indigo to wrap their babies in, to
Mm.
dye the underclothes if they're going to be traveling for a long period of time, or if they're going off to
Mm.
war, um, as a means of protecting their themselves. It's also
Mm.
the color blue is very soothing. So it's a dye that has been used to create a calming space, to also help to separate the exterior world from the interior world. So that's more of kind of a emotional healing aspect of the plant
Mm.
versus that kind of skin soothing healing properties. And you see that in Japan in the form of noren, which are the curtains that are on the outside of a shop in the doorway. It's a sort of was used a lot during the Edo era as a signage. So there would
Huh.
be the shop's emblem or something signifying what the shop was, but also that sort of like blue hue. And there, in certain traditions, there's that belief that the the indigo will, as you walk through, the indigo will kind of leave the outside energy, like kind of sort of like
Mm.
brushing the outside energy off of your body and leaving it outside as you come inside, so that it doesn't disrupt the energy in the interior space, which is a really beautiful concept.
Yeah.
But in the sense of the actual practical properties of medicinal dyeing, it's much the same as you would use a balm or a poultice or any kind of compress. So if you think in the terms of lotion or beauty products that are you putting on your skin, so you have herbs that are emollient and herbs that are astringent that help to bind and heal. You have herbs that are vulnerary, which are the wound healing herbs, which are the herbs that I tend to work with the most. So the emollient herbs, in the sense of like a dyer's chamomile, a calendula, marigolds, um, comfrey, fenugreek, plantain. Those are all more like emollient herbs that are going to help build your skin. And the
Mm,
vulnerary herbs are the herbs that are helpful if people have any sort of skin conditions like psoriasis or eczema or atopy. Um,
mm,
these are the herbs that you can dye the fabrics in that will help to repair the condition of the skin. I know in India, the tradition has been to dye the bedclothes or the
mm,
clothes, the like inside of the house clothes. So there's a lot of cultures where the clothes you wear inside the house aren't the same clothes that you would wear outside of the house. So once you come home, you change into the clothes that you wear inside the house. And so in within the tradition, a lot of the focus has been on, or from what I learned from my teacher, that was the main focus, was these clothes that you spend a lot of time in, or your sheets, like the bedclothes that you sleep in, so that
mm-hmm,
you have many, many hours of your skin being in contact with the properties of these beautiful dyes. Madder root is a color producing dye, can be from like kind of orangey, pinky colors into a red, that is uh, another traditional medicinal dye.
No, I love that. Yeah, it's. I don't think we often hear about the that entry point into the discussion around dyeing and indigo. I think it's often overlooked. Um, and kind of on that note, shifting gears towards how you use indigo in your art. Um, what, basically, how do you use indigo? Paying homage to its medicinal properties, and then what are some challenges that you encounter uh, when you're using it?
um, well, typically with the medicinal dyeing that I do, I apply it to I apply the concept to everything that I make. So whether it be like the artwork that I create for a gallery, um, or an article of clothing that I'm making for someone, I don't really differentiate between
Mm,
those aspects. I think see all of it as being a part of my art practice. So, honoring the history of indigo is, I mean, it's incredibly important, and it's a part of my personal practice, in the sense that all of my art practice is, it's about devotion and ritual and meditation and mindfulness, and like the things that connect us, um, as human, uh, throughout tradition, and that idea of collective consciousness. So those small aspects that sort of thread through humanity, regardless of culture or creed or your location. Um,
mm-hmm,
so it's really sort of kind of communing with the, in Japan, there is actually like a god that,
mm-hmm,
you give thanks to. And so I tend to, when I'm making a new uh, fermentation vat, to make the little kimono and
mm,
create the space for that gratitude. And really, with indigo, the medicinal aspects of it are more the kind of spiritual healing aspects, because indigo is so incredibly calming. There's just something about the vibration of the color that is, truly healing in and of itself. I do work with clients specifically who have skin conditions, or they're I will dye people's, baby diapers if they have issues
mm,
with their skin. I mean, I feel like all of these small things even just making little cloths that people can wash their face with or use as steam cloths. I consider all of that a part of my art practice. So it comes down to like the minutia of daily life, which I think is the core of my art practice, that art, our entire life is
Mm.
a work of art. And for all of us to be able to access that daily through just a practice of creating it. As
Hmm.
far as challenges go, I live in Southern California, and our climate is our climate is changing, but our climate is very dry, and a lot of times, and now in the summer, we'll have weeks of temperature that is unbearably hot and dry. And I tend to work with fermentation vats, so
Mm.
they are testy. So
Hmm.
if it's too windy or too dry, or at nighttime, if the temperature drops 40 degrees, it tends to disrupt what's happening in the indigo vat. So I think that, even as far along as I am in working with indigo, the challenges of keeping a fermentation vat viable and
Hmm.
happy is
Yeah.
it can be very difficult. I think that also a challenge is helping people understand the process of indigo when you're working with it in a traditional way, when you're working without petrochemicals. It's a very
Mm.
different process than um, someone who is creating a really quick vat that they can get up and running, within a day. And then there's not really so much that process of building color. I think because natural dyes and indigo have become like, there's these waves of trends, and it's
Hmm.
become incredibly trendy on social media, just kind of
Hmm.
educating clients on what it is that I do and the difference,
Mm.
and that it is a much more lengthy, labor intensive process than,
Hmm.
say, a pre reduced indigo that you use with hydros that maybe you can have up and running, I don't know, in like within a day, and then have your dyeing project done in 2 days. It's that's also
Hmm.
a bit challenging.
So how long does a dyeing project take you? Just for
Oh
a frame of
goodness, it
reference.
depends. Um, I mean, if a lot of times I use multiple dyes, so
Mm.
there's the lengthy process of preparing the fabric for dyeing, so the scouring and then the mordanting, and then the actual dyeing itself. So sometimes it can take weeks.
Hmm. Wow.
Typically, the mordaning process itself takes at least two to 3 days. Um,
Wow.
Obviously, with indigo, you don't need to mordant, but working with a fermentation vat, there's only can only work with it so long until it becomes a bit agitated and it needs time to rest. So there's also that aspect of just really kind of working with the conditions of the indigo vat, and not being able to press beyond that. So yeah, it can. I mean, if I'm trying to get the darker end of the spectrum, it can take 10 days of dyeing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's almost like you are, well, this is what I'm getting from it. It sounds like you are respecting the natural rhythms of the plants and the dying, such that it's just inherently um, sustainable and time consuming, and it lends itself to be to occupy a space that's more artistry than like something that could be mass produced.
Oh
So
yeah,
that's very
absolutely.
fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and I think that that is also the tradition of indigo, that,
Hmm.
you know, up until, recently, meaning like within the last 120 years, the tradition is that indigo dyers are masters and they are artists. And that that's kind of the arena of this dye, is the people who have dedicated their lives to learning the art of indigo
Hmm.
dyeing. So I mean, it. I think it's only been kind of a more modern idea of mass producing indigo and creating like an abundance of indigo dyed fabric and clothing. And I don't consider myself to be a master of indigo dyeing in any form.
Hmm.
I honestly, like, the people that I have been privileged to know and to work with in Japan, they are true masters, and most of them have dedicated their entire life, um, to this dye, and it's a lineage. So their ancestors also have, and they are incredible craftspeople. And I'm an artist. I don't have that sort of dedication to
Hmm.
this one beautiful practice. So for me,
Hmm.
it's a tool, um,
Mm.
much as every other part of my
Yeah.
practice is a tool. I honor it, but I am by no means any sort of master or
Yeah.
craftsperson. But yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's a very different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing about it. And I guess kind of talking about the role of indigo and how people treat it, how you treat it. I'm curious to know your thoughts on what the future, what you expect or what you hope the future of indigo to look like from your perspective.
I hope that this new resurgence of interest in indigo will help people to be a bit more thoughtful about their consumption. I think that there has been, quite a movement towards consuming less, and there's been a big backlash against fast fashion, and maybe understanding what really goes into creating your clothes. And hopefully that'll translate into people maybe being a little less trend driven and keeping the clothes that they purchase, and cherishing them more. It is really lovely to see these larger scale farms. What is it called? Stony Creek Colors in Tennessee. And there's quite a few projects that have been up and running in the last decade that are scaling indigo, natural indigo, for mass production in a much more thoughtful way, in a way that is less toxic to the environment. So it's really incredibly exciting to see that happening,
Hmm.
that shift within the industry, because as much as we want people to consume less, there's a need for clothing, and people want to buy new things. So I think that if these new farms and dye production are successful in being able to create more of a produced garment in a less toxic way, then that's a really beautiful thing for the future. It's very exciting to see that
Hmm.
happening. Yeah, I think that also one of the things that has been really nice to see with this new trend, this new resurgence of indigo being trendy, is a lot of people growing the plant themselves, and
Hmm.
learning, trying to process the plant themselves and create their own indigo vat, or just doing fresh leaf dyeing, so they have more of a personal experience with indigo and with the dye plant, and maybe more of an understanding of what really goes into creating that color, and the amount of time that it takes to grow the plant, and the amount of water that it takes to grow the plant,
Mm-hmm.
and through the dyeing process, the amount of water that it takes. So I think that there's a new level of knowledge that would come naturally from that process. So I think that that's an exciting thing to see happen too. It's people just becoming closer to the source of what creates color for their clothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that you've definitely hit it on the head, and I think that I hope that as well. I think with the resurgence, as you've noticed, of wanting to know where things are from, wanting to know how things are made, yeah, we can hope that this is our brighter, lovely shade of denim, lovely
Right.
shade of indigo future.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's
Um,
not as
mhm,
simple as it seems. It's funny to see, because I think a lot of the new kind of trend towards natural dyes, it's an interesting to see how a lot of it seems to be driven by content creation. Like a lot of everything
mm,
is driven by content creation these days. But when you're working with a dye plant that you're growing and having to process yourself, it's not that like instant gratification of like, oh, here's this thing that like I can just put together in a day. It's like, oh wait, now I have to wait a season. This plant has to
mhm,
grow. So,
mhm,
it kind of just naturally slows everything down, which is
mhm.
we all need.
Yeah, I hear ya. Well, thank you
Yeah,
for
thank you.
chatting with us. Yeah, thank you so much.